All right, let's go to Donald Kimball. He is my partner in communications here at Washington Policy Center, and he had a great column with Charles Prestrud in the Seattle Times. I wanted to call attention to that. The column was about autonomous vehicles, and the autonomous vehicles kind of they are they they seem like all the future, but at the same time, people get very worried about them, very worried about the idea of having these vehicles without drivers on the streets. A number of our staff have taken taxis that had no drivers. They're just computers driving people around. And and then, there was a piece of legislation brought up that said, okay, if we're going to have these autonomous vehicles, there has to be one human on board for safety purposes. And that's what sparked the column that was co-authored by Donald and Charles Prestrud. Donald, tell us how it came to fruition and what your first thought was when you heard about this proposal to put one human on board with any autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, so I was looking through the pre-filed bills, and sometimes you're reading a bill and it's complicated language, so you're making sure you're understanding it. And I got to this line that said, in order for a driverless car to operate in the state, it has to have a human safety operator to make sure it's stopped. And I was like, wait, I have to be misunderstanding this. This can't mean a driverless car has to essentially have a driver, right? But sure enough, that is one of the requirements of this bill. And so I was talking about it with Charles, our transportation director, who again, he contributed so much. Like we co-wrote this, but like he just provided all this research and data, which has been excellent for this column in the Seattle Times. And we were laughing because I understand that there are concerns about driverless cars. I understand that there's apprehension regarding how safe they are. But it is very funny when you have a human safety operator requirement in Washington for driverless vehicles, when California, which has had driverless vehicles operating in their state for quite some time, they ended that very same safety requirement in 2018. So we're not even talking about starting this requirement, 7 years ago. We're talking about having ended that requirement 6 or 7 years ago because they had demonstrated how effectively safe they were. And so Charles and I were talking, and what it seems to be is that in the name of safety, they're proposing these kind of stoppages for driverless vehicles. But in reality, it seems like they're actually trying to look out for transit agencies that don't want to adopt a driverless vehicle model as part of their planning when they sorely need something to help the absolute dismal state of their transportation plans that are over budget and underserving people, and congestion is just continually increasing because of it.
Yeah, in fact, we went through this with Charles a while back. I can't remember if it was on the go or otherwise, but you've got a lot of transit plans were put together with all kinds of ideas of what the future would hold, and the future has not followed their course. It has not followed that model at all. But there hasn't been a major response in Washington State where a lot of transit agencies are going back and saying, you know what, with the changes of commutes, with after COVID and other things, this is just not happening. We got new technologies that can accomplish the same thing, maybe for a lot less. They're not doing that. They're kind of sticking with, well, this is what we wanted. What's wrong with you people? Why aren't you following this path of what we wanted? If we build more of it, they will come. They will surely come this time.
Well,
We're kind of stuck in that course.
you're exactly right. And to that point, the city of Seattle, for instance, is spending so much money on electrifying their buses. Now, electrifying their buses does not help increase ridership. It doesn't shore up a gap that in service, where maybe routes are needed more or help, relieve congestion. It doesn't even help reduce the cost because of the high upfront prices of the electrification. So what does it do? Well, maybe it marginally offsets some green, balance there, some sort of environmental impact. But if you looked into integrating driverless vehicles into some of your less used routes, right? There are areas that have low ridership that you don't need a full bus for. If you actually invested in autonomous vehicles, you could have similar environmental impact. You could do it in a more cost-effective way, and you could still be providing service to areas that have low ridership but still want some level of service. So that's one of the things we bring out. And Todd Myers, our VP of Research and our environmental guru, has often pointed out that so much of this state claims to want to be environmental, but then they don't actually do things that move the needle in an effective way. And this is just another example where they want the title of environmental help with this electrification of buses. But if they were looking at it with a future in mind, adapting to the changes that we have rather than being stuck in their old ways, they would see that autonomous vehicles can actually help the environment as well as congestion and cost and those kinds of things. So it's just kind of a funny juxtaposition where they're willing to spend money for transportation, but not in an effective way, just in the way that they want to.
It's a bizarre thing, and especially when you consider how much money is in play, how little this is looked at, and it's tough because people will kind of they act like if you bring it up and you talk about it, that somehow you're doing a wrong to public transit, like you're dismissing the idea that there's any role for public transit anywhere, unless you're kind of fitting in with the current plan. But it could easily be argued that if you're not using those finite resources effectively, you're denying people the ability to move more effectively and and the services where they're most needed, which is I think what happens here in Washington State. In a nutshell, I just love how there's this common sense thing where people are, there's this reaction, oh, here's a new technology, I'm a little afraid of it, we've got to have somebody in the car in order to have these autonomous vehicles. But of course, if they're in the car, why not just let them drive? Did you take a look at what the safety record was? I never want an autonomous car. I can say that right now. I love driving. I like taking myself somewhere. I don't like the feeling of, I don't like the feeling of riding with other people. Well, I take this back. If I turn 80 and I'm not able to drive myself anymore, then I'll hire a robot, to drive me around. That might be okay, but I'm not real keen on that idea. That said, I would be curious to know what the safety record is, because my bet is the autonomous vehicles are at least approaching, if not exceeding, human beings already.
Well, yeah, that's a great point, because that is, again, most of people's concerns. So I want to talk through that. But one thing you kind of just mentioned there that I think is actually a really major point that I didn't get to address because, op-eds have to be short.
Yeah.
But the ability for people who are otherwise impaired is so greatly increased by autonomous vehicles. People who have no other options, or who maybe are on the cusp of not being able to have mobility, now have an option through autonomous vehicles like never before. So I think that's a pretty major point, and that's true not only of owning your own autonomous vehicle, but even in services. So you have Uber and Lyft, which are amazing. You have taxis, which can do the job. But if you're in a rural area, you're at night, you're in not it's not guaranteed to have a human who's up at that time in that area able to come. Autonomous
Right.
vehicles can respond to that a lot quicker. So you actually enable a lot more people to move who otherwise would not be able to. Again, particularly people who are disadvantaged, mobilely impaired, and etc. But let's talk about safety, because that is, again, the biggest thing. And one of the most common things I'll hear is, can't they get hacked? How do they respond to other humans? So let's kind of break it down. The first thing to note is every single accident, whether it's just a light fender bender or anything more serious, has to be recorded by autonomous vehicles. They are mandated by law. So we can roughly say that about, not perfectly, but about 100% of autonomous vehicle accidents are on record. This is not the case for humans. So humans many times don't want to get insurance involved. They don't want to report to the police. It's a hassle. Sometimes people will speed off and run, and just flee the scene. So we don't have perfect reporting with humans. Even still, when you measure it by miles driven rather than number of incidents directly, per miles driven, autonomous vehicles are far and away much, much safer by every study out there than human drivers. And every single collision has happened between not every single, I shouldn't say every single, but the vast majority of collisions that occur have to do with humans freaking out about the autonomous vehicle and panicking in some way, shape, or form. Now, that doesn't mean that, that is something to consider, but it's also not like the car going rogue and tearing into a building. The
Yeah.
vast majority of autonomous vehicle data show that they are much, much safer. And then we talk about the potential for hacking or going berserk. Ironically, I think the day that this article was published, there was a news story going on about a guy whose autonomous vehicle taxi was driving in circles in the parking lot and made him late and made him miss the flight.
I saw that video, by the way. It's just around and around. I would have been dizzy. But again, he's on the line trying to get him to help him, and they're saying we got to use the app, and he's like, why should I use my phone? You go. It's like OnStar, press stop on this car. I shouldn't have to use my app for it.
Right. And so there's certainly, I'm not downplaying that that can happen, but we also have to ask the question, compared to what, right? We don't live
Right.
on a blank island where there are no comparison measures. What we're talking about replacing is humans who have not only the ability to be hacked when you talk about things like distraction, exhaustion, drinking, drugs, even people, like I was saying before, whose maybe their visibility is impaired, but they're not ready to give up driving yet. There's all kinds of ways that humans themselves get hacked in a similar way. Just because it has electric vehicles have the capacity does not mean it's going to happen en masse the same way that we do have that happen every day. And the other thing is, with that story, I think he was stuck in the car a total of 5 minutes. It was resolved. And if you're getting to the airport and you're missing your flight by like 5 minutes, that's kind of on you. But the the other thing to consider is that that was a notable news story because it was eye grabbing, attention grabbing. It was sexy, but we don't hear major news stories about someone falling asleep at the wheel, causing a crash on I-5, delaying traffic for hours and hours. You hear about it, on the traffic updates, but it's not a news story because it's so common. That's not notable. And so
Right.
again, we have to remember, compared to what? So yes, I understand and I totally respect people's decisions. If they don't want to use autonomous vehicles, they don't want to get inside, that's fine. I just don't think the legislature should be going in and making these decisions that effectively kneecap the entire industry that can serve purposes for individuals, for state transit agencies, and more.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of exciting applications possible with this that we'll look at, and that could give you more time. I mean, look, if you can deliver better service for less, then that means people should be able to keep more of their money, which, as my old mentor and friend Peter Weisbeck used to describe as life energy, which is, I think, a great way to put it. Money isn't just money. You can replace money, you can make more money, and the rest. You just don't get your time back. So, at any given point in time, a certain amount of money represents a certain amount of your time earning it. And that's no small thing. People have a finite number of days on this earth. And they should be able to spend them how they wish and with the people that they love. And that's one of the reasons why I think, accountability in government is so important, and what the work of the Washington Policy Center is so important. And speaking of, Donald, one of the things that we wanted to cover today was explaining to people how, if they heard Pam and they said to themselves, I might not know anything about farming, but I would like to express my view on this bill, that they could do so. So why don't we do a screen share here and walk people through how they can leave remote testimony, or how they could sign up for remote testimony, or just write some testimony. Because, as I was saying, if you've never done it, and by the way, if you've never left testimony, welcome to the 99.5% of the public, because most people don't leave, they don't get involved, they don't testify, they don't leave a message. So the more people that do that, and with this new technology, it's easier than ever. And you don't have to worry if you're not a public speaker, if you don't want to be embarrassed, you can leave written testimony. The more people who do that, the more it kind of wakes up. Legislators, they care when people start leaving messages. They pay attention to that, and that is talked about throughout Olympia. So it's a very important tool, a very effective tool, and I want to make sure people know how to do that. So
Yeah.
if you're ready, Donald, let's screen share there and
Yes.
walk people through that.
Okay, everyone should be able to see my screen here.
I
This
see it.
is, yep, our legislature's website, which actually just recently got revamped. So it may look a little unfamiliar if you've been to the site before, but the functions are all the same and they're located in the same way. It's just kind of a fresh coat of paint. So this is ledge.wa.gov. That's the URL. And right on the homepage, you have this, I'm looking for a bill or initiative. There's more ways to find, but let's say I couldn't remember. Let's say I wanted to leave testimony for the bill that Pam was talking about, and I couldn't quite remember the number. One thing you can do is you can hit more ways to find the bills, or you can go up to this tab here that says bills, meetings, and sessions. And there's, again, that brings you to the same thing. It'll show you committee hearings, all this sort of stuff, but we're just interested in finding the bill right now. So let's hit more ways to find bills and initiatives. And you can look up information like the text of a legislative document, a bill summary. So if I wanted to look up the text, I remember, let's say, oh, I know that it's a bill this year, and I know that I think it talks about combines. I think this one is the search here, so we can hit. Oh, I'm sorry. This is not quite the right spot here. I think if we go into the go to bills maybe here, so we can search. Like, let's just hit the search button, leave it blank, and you're not sure. It'll bring you to this page. You can search the full text. So again, if you don't know what the number is, just hit search with it empty, and then you can search the text of a bill. And so you can search term. I'm gonna like I remember it's about farm equipment. I can hit combines, and then you check what you're looking for, and I'm looking for a bill, and then you can hit search. And over here, you can see, oh, it's 5092 right here. This bill right here, an act relating to sales and tax exemption. You can click it here and it brings up the text and you see farm equipment includes. So now you know the number 5092. So then we can, again, go to that homepage and we put in, now that we know the number 5092. We can search for that. And then this gives us sort of an update of where the bill is. So you can see its current status is the Senate Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. That's what that stands for. You can also see that here it's in the Senate, it's in committee, and you can look at the history where it shows it was pre-filed on December 20, January 13, it had the first reading, and then it was referred to Agriculture and Natural Resources, scheduled for public hearing on at 1:30 for January 16. So you can see that right there. So now this gives you the information you need to know for the next step, which is to sign up to testify or submit written testimony, which this link right here. So you can click that and it brings you to your Senate committee sign-in page. And this will, if you're in for a House bill, will do the same thing for the House. Now, the nice thing about that link is it fills in all of this information for you already. If, again, you were looking for a bill, but you didn't know, you can also achieve the same thing by going to this tab here, Bills, Meetings, and Sessions, going to the session, and then look at how to testify at a committee hearing. That will also help you if you don't know the specific bill, but you want to look it up by committee. But here you can see that the committee is Agriculture, Natural Resources, the meeting on the 16th at 1:30, because that's all the information that was on that bill page. And then you can see the list of bills here that will be heard at that committee. And that includes 5092, which is the one already checked for us that we want to do. Now you have the choice depending on what you want to do. I would like to testify in person during the hearing. So that's if you're down in Olympia and you want to make yourself known. That is for the most bold of us, perhaps, and the most able to be in that area. There is, I would like to testify remotely, and this is the video testimony. So if you have your computer or your phone that has video and audio capability, you can click there. I would like my position noted for the legislative record. That is the least committal. If that's just you want to be on record as supporting or opposing a bill, you don't have to write out your reasons. You don't have to give any insight. You can just say, yeah, let's do this. I like this bill. And lastly, I would like to submit written testimony. Of course, if you have more to do, more to write, and perspective to offer, things for the committee to consider.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Great job there, and we can provide more information as time goes on, and we'll provide some links, easy links to certain pieces of legislation over the course of the session. Watch for our newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed, you should. It's free. You should get your friends and neighbors to subscribe as well, because they'll get the key information they need about the legislative session for free on Fridays. And we'll provide some links there so that you can have your voice heard on key pieces of legislation as well, because it is important. And the more that it's talked about, the more people who leave messages, the more legislators pay attention. Now, ask anyone who's worked in Olympia or in Congress, and they'll tell you people pay attention when something gets a lot of response, because it's rare. For the most part, people are living their lives. They don't have time to deal with politics, and they don't think about it until it really hits their pocketbook. I mean, last year, for example, when there was the bill that would curtail the ability of hairdressers to make a living, suddenly, there was a virtual army of people, all who were professionals in terms of hairdressing, and they were out there and they were very loud, and they wanted to be heard, and they were heard. So don't dismiss yourself, and make sure that you get as many people as possible to say what they need to say, about whatever bill that you hear about that you think needs to be different or needs to change or needs to pass. Let's make sure that we're not quiet people in Washington State. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, the last thing I want to point out is if you are doing the remote testimony, you'll put in your email and they will send you a link. You can do it ahead of time when you so if you don't have to go minutes before. In fact, I think registration closes about an hour before. So the earlier you register, the better, because they can't guarantee time to hear everyone necessarily. But when you're on this page, you can choose your position, you can put in your name, email, and then again, they once you put in your email there, they will email you a link to use to access that meeting to testify there. So that's how you can access that specific portion if you are remotely testifying. Just wanted to clarify that in case anyone was worried about doing it early. Earlier is better.
Yeah. And one more thing is sometimes you'll be tempted. You'll see a piece of legislation, it's so outrageous and ridiculous, and you're upset about it. That said, you can say, this is destructive for these reasons, but try to hold back on personal insults or anything of that nature, because there's no faster way to be dismissed. They're not going to take you as seriously. If you were live on video, they might just cut you off entirely. So there's a certain protocol of respectfulness, civility expected, and just you save the name calling for your social media trolling if you're into that type of thing. That's all I'll say about that.
If you need to, vent, email
Then,
me. That's fine.
yeah,
Just send
that's
it
fine.
send it an email to me and I'll hear you out. But
Yeah. I don't take offense either. I've had people email me nasty things for years. That's I'm all for it. Go
I think
ahead.
everyone has a hate mail folder at WPC, perhaps, to look back at the best of.
Yeah, good stuff. And I don't take it personally for the most part. All right. Well, thank you, Donald. Thanks for the great column in the Seattle Times. We'll talk with Charles more about transportation coming up. Next week, we'll have Todd Myers, our Vice President for Research here at Washington Policy Center. We'll talk with Todd Myers, and we'll be live in the building here. We'll have a live event with other people who've signed up and registered in to watch Washington Policy on the go. It's not, I mean, obviously, it's not rocket science. I'm not a Swiftie. No Taylor Swift big concert here. Just a couple of people, a few people having a conversation about policy and its impact on Washington State. But it's a great way to have lunch. So, bring your sack lunch, bring whatever it is you want to eat for lunch, and then we'll provide coffee and beverages. You can sign up and register at our website, washingtonpolicy.org. And we look forward to seeing you next week with that experiment. Thank you to those of you on Facebook who are watching. We do this every week, every Tuesday during the legislative session. So watch for that. If you missed part of it, we'll upload it to YouTube as well, so you can see the full broadcast there. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week on Washington Policy on the Go.